Okay, welcome to Chapter 6, Pre-Incident Planning and Code Enforcement. This is an important chapter, I think, for you as fire officers to really pay attention to because you need to know your buildings when you get out there into the field. And pre-incident planning is covered under NFPA 1620, so if you can get a copy of that, it'll kind of guide you through what you might want to do to make up some pre-incident plans for some of the more target hazards in your response area. So it's broken down into a few different elements, I think like 6 elements that we're going to go through. So the first element, identify the physical elements. So if you have plans, take a look at the access to the building. So if you have a target hazard, maybe something new is going up in your town, or if you have a larger building that could be confusing or you want to pre-plan it, see if you have plans or you can get a hold of the plans, and start with looking at the access of the building. So where are you going to send your first arriving companies? All right, and then get a physical description of the building, how many floors, the size, the height of the building, and then get an idea what the construction is, the walls, floors, that type of thing. So identify the target hazard as far as its physical attributes. Next, we're going to go into identify the occupancy. Right. So when we talk about an occupancy of a building, so we can say, what is the building used for? So the occupancy of the building is also called the use. So is it a residential building? Is it a mercantile building where they sell things? A strip mall, a store, a Lowe's, a Home Depot, something like that. Is it a business? Do they conduct business like a lawyer's office, a doctor's office, something like that? An assembly, or is it a restaurant, a place that people gather, a movie theater, things like that? So that's the use of a building. When we talk about use, what's it going to be used for? And again, that's kind of important because when you get into pre-incident planning and we start to do later on, we do incident action plans, things like that. The use of the building is important because when are you apt to find people in that building? If it's a residential building and people sleep there, obviously if there's a call there at night, there's a very good chance you're going to find people in the building who are asleep. Versus a mercantile or a business office, if you get a call there in the middle of the night, most likely there isn't going to be anybody in the building. So the use of the building is important when you're doing pre-incident planning and when you're talking about your site. Okay, next we're going to deal with water supply and fire protection systems. So you as a fire officer, it's really a good idea to have an idea of how much water is available in different parts of your response area, and to kind of have an idea of what type of fire protection systems are in the building that you're going to respond to. All right. Now we talked about the identifying the elements of the building, the entrances and things like that. Well, one of the other things you might want to do is you want to go ahead and look at where the fire department connection is located. So your first 1 or 2 engines may want to stop at the fire department connection in case they have to hook up to the sprinkler or the standpipe system. Now, the picture to the left is a standpipe and the sprinkler system, FDCs, for a hospital complex. And again, there's numerous fire department connections around the complex or the campus because they serve different parts of the campus. So another thing is you're going to get yourself an idea of what fire department connection covers what section of a building or what building in a campus that has multiple buildings. So another thing that you want to look at in your pre-incident planning. We want to look at special considerations. So special considerations would include buildings that are vacant, buildings that are in disrepair. Maybe there's some type of special operation going on or process. Is it a factory building where they produce products and there's some hazardous materials involved, or there's some hazardous processes involved in the manufacture of the products? So again, something that you might want to pre-plan and have on a list of chemicals or a list of operations that are involved in the building, so you can better prepare your members if they respond there. Now in the picture to the left, you see this cross on the building. Now under the New Jersey Fire Code, that's required for vacant buildings. So it's vacant building placarding. So if you look at the X, that X is telling us that we shouldn't go into that building. There's too many hazards. The floors are rotted. There may not be any floors. There's a collapse hazard, things like that. So it's definitely a warning sign to firefighters. Listen, this building is vacant. Don't go in. Stay outside. And the arrow pointing to the right, that's basically pointing towards the entrance to the building. Even though we probably don't want to go in there, we may want to know where the main entrance is. So special considerations encompasses those type of buildings. So number 5, identify emergency operation considerations. So in identifying emergency operation considerations, let's develop a plan for a fire in a building, a plan for the various stages of the fire. So on the left we have a schematic of a hotel. All right, it's telling us where the rooms are. It's giving us room numbers. So if we have a reported fire, or we have a reported smoke condition in a room, if we have this information available, we can pull it up and we can see where the room is in the complex. Now, why is this important? Because if we get some multi-level hotels, we may have or even large apartment buildings, we may have 2 or 3 standpipes located in different stairwells in the building. So if we know in relation to the standpipe where is the room that's in question, we can better deploy our forces to that stairwell and hook up to that standpipe and have a much shorter hose stretch to get to the room, versus hooking up to a standpipe on the end of the hallway and then realizing the room where the fire is on the other end of the building, and now we either have to move to a different standpipe or we got to bring in more hose and extend the line to get down to where the fire is. So develop a plan for a fire in these buildings, and again, good set of floor plans, a schematic, something that's simple, easy to read, something that just points out the important stuff. Like in the picture here, we can see where the FDC is located. We can see where there's a fire hydrant in the parking lot is located. We have the exits labeled. We have the apartments labeled, things like that. So kind of important stuff. So document your plan. Once you come up with your plan, you have to put it somewhere where it can be easily retrieved. So if you put it on a computer, a computer-aided dispatch system, and it's linked to that address, the dispatcher could probably pull it up real quick. The chief could pull it up when he gets on scene, looking at his CAD. If he's lucky enough to have a driver, he could look at the information while he's en route to the call. even a fire officer in the front seat of the apparatus may be able to look at some of the information on the way to the call if they have it in the CAD system. So it's nice if you can get that stored in your CAD system and somebody can look at it real quick. If you can't, or as an addition, pre-plan binders, right? They can be stored in the apparatus with some of your target hazards. You can also use these binders as a drill in the firehouse. Cold weather drill. Pull out the binder for a target hazard, and just go over like where the standpipes are located, where's the fire department connection. If you're the chauffeur, how are you going to approach this building to best position your engine at a hydrant and then be able to reach the standpipe relatively easily with a short stretch of hose, since you're probably going to be the one that's going to be hooking up to the standpipe or the fire department connection by yourself. So just a real quick cold weather or nasty weather drill to do in the firehouse. And then don't be afraid to go out. If the weather gets nice, go out and drive to a couple of these target hazards, drive around, let the guys take a look. In case they have to respond there, they can have a better idea of what they need to do, so they can increase their tempo. Alright, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about building codes versus fire codes. So on the left you see the International Building Code. 2018 edition is what we're using right now. And building codes determine how a new building is built. The size, height of the building is based on the construction and the occupancy. Remember we talked about occupancy earlier? And the requirement for fire and life safety systems, such as fire alarms and sprinkler systems. This all comes out of the building code when a new building is going to be built. Fire codes, on the other hand, are used to enforce the requirements of life safety in buildings after the building has been built. So this would include the maintenance of fire alarm systems, sprinkler systems, exits, which we call means of egress, occupancy loads, that type of thing. So a new building is built based on the building code, and then a year later, hopefully someone is going in to do an inspection, and they're going to make sure that that fire alarm system that was required when the building was built is being maintained, is being tested. They're going to make sure that that sprinkler system that was required when the building was built is being maintained, is being tested, making sure that all the exits and everything are operable, things like that. So that's one of the differences between building codes and fire. So in New Jersey, we have the Uniform Construction Code. So how this is applied is that the Uniform Construction Code is a state statute. It's a law, all right? And it references other model codes, such as the International Building Code, the International Residential Code. So if we're going to build a new building, we start with the requirements in the New Jersey Uniform Construction Code, which is going to reference the International Building Code or the International Residential Code. So if it's a new building that's being built, it's going to be built under the IBC or the IRC. If we have a building that is already built and they want to do alterations, they want to do remodels, they want to do additions, then the New Jersey Uniform Construction Code is the code that is referenced and applied to the remodels and additions and alterations of buildings. And again, they may reference a model code such as the International Building Code or the International Residential Code and other NFPA standards. So renovations, things like that, all come under the building code, the Uniform Construction Code. Now versus the International Fire Code, again, for inspections in New Jersey, we use the New Jersey edition of the International Fire Code. So what New Jersey has done is they've taken the International Fire Code and they've modified some of the chapters, added, deleted, things like that, to make it more specific for New Jersey. And this is the code that we use to do annual fire inspections. This code also references other model codes such as NFPA standards, the International Gas Code, the International Mechanical Code, things like that. So that is a real quick difference on comparison between New Jersey building codes. Now we're going to take a quick look at model codes. So model codes, and again, we also talked about the International Building Code and Residential Code, Fuel Gas Mechanical Code. Those are model codes, but in this case we're going to talk about NFPA, right? National Fire Protection Association. So the NFPA codes, even though they call them codes, they're actually standards, and standards are not enforceable unless they're adopted by reference. So, what does that mean to you? All right, we always hear, "Oh, you got to follow NFPA. You got to follow NFPA." The issue is that NFPA is not a requirement. It's a group of an NFPA standard is basically drawn up by a group of people that are part of the standards committee for a certain standard. So let's talk about a sprinkler standard, right? So the sprinkler code, you may have a dozen people on the sprinkler code committee, manufacturers, fire people, suppliers, building people, and they're going to come up with a consensus of what they think needs to be written into the standard on how to install sprinkler systems, the way sprinkler systems cover areas, things like that. So the NFPA standard for sprinklers doesn't become binding until it is referenced. So if we take the International Building Code, now the International Building Code is going to reference NFPA 13 for sprinklers. So it's basically adopted. All right. Once it becomes adopted, it becomes a law that you have to follow. Same thing in OSHA. Now OSHA is anything in OSHA is considered a law because it's a federal standard. So once you put that federal standard, federal regulations in there, that makes it a federal law. So what OSHA does, OSHA goes ahead and looks at NFPA, and they say, okay, well, we like a lot of this stuff that's already written, these standards in NFPA. So OSHA, an arm of the federal government, will adopt a NFPA standard, and once they adopt it, it becomes law. So now you have to follow it. The only other issue with NFPA standards is that they're also considered best practices. So you as a fire officer, if something goes wrong and you get called on the carpet or your department gets sued, they're going to look at you through a microscope and say, hey, did you follow this NFPA standard? So just an example, there's been some case studies on fire departments who haven't supplied a fire department connection for a sprinkler system at a sprinkler building. Now, if you read some of the NFPA standards for fire department operations, they're going to tell you that one of the first or second units responding to a fire in a building that has a sprinkler system is to have one of those engine companies hook up and supply the sprinkler system. And there's been fire departments who've been sued based on that NFPA standard where they neglected to put water into the sprinkler system and the building was a total loss. So the plaintiff said, well, if the fire department had followed NFPA and put water into the sprinkler system, my building would have burnt down. So therefore, they owe us money. They're going to be assessed in that judgment for not following that NFPA standard. Even though it's not a law, it's called a best practice. So it is probably in your best interest as a fire officer to take a look at some of these NFPA standards and just make sure that you're doing, or your department is doing business based on some of these standards. So let's talk about built-in fire protection. So building codes dictate the need for fire protection. So when a building is built, as I stated before, we're looking at an international building code, international residential code, and based on the use or type of building, it may call for a sprinkler system, it may call for a standpipe system, and that's all based on the height of the building, the size of the building, and again the occupancy type. So if we get any residential occupancy other than a single family dwelling, now requires a sprinkler system, some type of a sprinkler system. We get into an assembly building, right? Based on the square footage, it's going to require a sprinkler system. We get into buildings that are over 3 stories, you're going to have a standpipe. All right. So all these fire protection systems are based on the building code and the use of the building. So as a fire officer, it's your job to get some training on these systems and how they operate. So again, you have a building with a sprinkler system or multiple sprinkler systems, try to get in there, do a walkthrough, try to see where the areas that they cover, things like that. So educate yourself on the use of sprinkler systems and fire alarm systems. Alright, so building construction types. Again, this is laid out in the building code, but there are 5 basic building construction types that we as fire officers need to have understanding of. Right? So a type 1 building is also referred to as fire resistive. So I do a course for building construction, which is a standalone course. I think it gets right down to the basics of all these types of construction. But a type 1 building, a fire resistive building, basically means that I call it the bones of the building, the structure. So the parts of the building that hold the building up are made of materials or covered with materials that resist direct flame contact. So the building isn't going to fall down anytime soon when it's being attacked by fire. There's time in that type of construction. Then there's non-combustible type 2, which is again non-combustible structural elements, the bones of the building, but they have no fire protection. They have no rating. So if you can have a steel bar joist that has flame impingement, and that's going to collapse at a relatively short period of time, even though it's not combustible. And then type 3 ordinary. So basically the bearing walls are made of some type of non-combustible or masonry material, and your floor system or your roof system is more than likely made of wood, dimensional lumber or wood truss. Heavy timber, the bones of the building are large diameter wood, usually like 8 by 8, 8 by 10. You have to think of the mill construction like the old factory mills, the old northeast sections of the United States, like the Boston area, Massachusetts. Those are all considered heavy timber, or they also call them mill construction. And then we have our wood frame. And wood frame is grouped into lightweight wood frame. Again, buildings are built with lightweight trusses, lightweight systems. So those are the 5 basic types of building construction types. So as a fire officer, you should really have a basic understanding of how the building is built, because you're going to relate the building construction to strategy. So when we get into doing instant action planning, or we do strategy and tactics, the building construction is a big part of how you're going to develop and what kind of strategy and what kind of tactics you're going to use for a fire in that type of building. So we're going to just go back to use groups real quick. I know I talked about it, I believe, in the first one or two slides, but use groups or occupancy. So what is the occupancy type? Occupancy can be described as what the building is used for. We often interchange the word use or use group to mean the same thing. So when we say use group, or occupancy, we're talking about the same thing. So in the building code, we have some use groups or occupancy types that we deal with. So we can have assembly and educational, residential, mercantile, a business, storage, factory, and institutional or high hazard. And again, all these occupancy types require different types of construction, and based on the occupancy, they may require specialized fire suppression systems. They may require sprinkler systems. They may require fire alarm systems. So all this is determined on the use of the building, which then determines the construction type of the building, and then the height of the building, the area of the building is all dependent on the construction type, and then what type of fire protection systems do you need in the building. So it can all get kind of confusing, but you really need to have a basic idea of building construction, the occupancy type, fire protection systems, as part of your pre-planning for large target hazard buildings. Okay, I hope that wasn't too confusing, but thanks for watching. Okay, be smart, stay disciplined, keep training, and again, nothing we do is safe. So, till next time, see you later.